All right, so next up, we're going to have Kohsuke Kawaguchi, who is a bit of a legend in the open source world because Kohsuke created Jenkins, which really revolutionized automation in software engineering. And Kohsuke is also the CTO of CloudBees, which is a company that provides Jenkins services. And Kohsuke is going to come and talk about his personal journey in diversity and inclusion. Big round of applause.
Go. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Kohsuke. So I wanted to talk about the diversity, but this talk is a little different from the usual diversity talk, where usually the people who experience that diversity hurdles and so on talk about their experience. But I'm not really a minority in the tech community in any stretch of our imaginations. I'm Asian, I'm from California, and I always felt like a part of the majority. Nonetheless, in this space and industry, and so where I came from originally, which is Japan, I also felt like I'm a part of the cause and the movement, right? I know the diversity is, I think nowadays well recognized as a good thing, and I don't think many people would say, oh, I'm actively against the idea of diversity. Like you don't find people like that, right? And I also have a little bit of experience what it feels like to be on the minority side. One of my hobbies is to do a needlework, cross-stitching. Now, how many of you do that? Right? Probably not many, because you can imagine this hobby is generally associated with old women, and so people like me don't really belong there. So at one point, I went to a store outside the Bay Area, and then there was like a group of people enjoying the conversation and cross-stitching together. I wanted to blend in a little. I tried a little bit. They were nice and all that. But I didn't feel like I was welcome at the place, and I never went back. So that gave me something to think about. In this project that I created, Jenkins, I really believed in this idea that innovation happened everywhere, right? So Jenkins comes with this extensive plugin ecosystem where anybody in the world can add stuff on top of it and make the whole thing more valuable. And then I really benefited from people from different industry, people who deal with the different technology, they bring different perspectives and what they needed on top of this platform that made it so much richer. So that was also very, very important for me. So once again, all of that is to say, I felt like I was a fan of the movement, supporter of the cause, etc. But something happened that sort of made me kind of wonder if that truly is the case. So at work, at CloudBees, one of my responsibilities is to run the community team. So I brought in Tracy Miranda, who's in this picture. Some of you might know her. She's very famous in the Eclipse Foundations, and she advocated for the diversity in that. Now, that's not the reason I brought her over to the CloudBees, but nonetheless, I was at the strategy meeting, strategy planning session for the community team. We are talking about what we're going to do in the next quarter of the year as a key effort. And quite unsurprisingly, she brought up the idea that, well, we should really push hard on the diversity. That's going to be a good thing for the community. But what was even more surprising is that I find myself unconvinced. Right? I had lots of other ideas. I wanted to improve the documentations. I wanted to interview the whole bunch of the first-time plugin contributors, do this or that and something else. All of these things are good for the community team to work on. And I wanted those to be done, not the diversity inclusion effort. So what got me wondering, the way I started thinking about it is, you're just being fan of the, let's say, diversity is not enough. Well, that's not the bar, right? That's obviously a good idea. What's really a bar is the battle over priority. Do you see it important enough that it comes top of the priority? Or is it just like all the other good things that never gets done, right? So in this case, what I found is at least for me in that context, I find myself unable to pick the diversity at the top of the queue. So in fact, I wasn't a fan of the movement. I was part of the inertia. I was a part of the system that makes it difficult for people who advocate, passionate about it, to move it forward. Now, so the real question is not whether it's good or bad. The real question is how valuable it is for the business to be able to take it. You need to be able to justify that in order to really drive it. Right? Just because the diversity is a good social value doesn't mean you can take that on as a business, right? You have to hit your goals, you have to make your money and all that stuff. So that questions, like that was an uncomfortable realization for me. So I started kind of going down a bit of a soul searching, right? The way I saw it, either like I find a way to justify that, and then in that process be able to convince people in the team and my boss that, well, this is a worthy thing that aligned well with my cause, or like I have to admit it to myself that I'm not really a fan of the movement. Like I still don't actively oppose it, but it's not important enough for me, right? And then that might be, that's something I'd have to come to terms with. So I started, like I said, doing a bit of soul searching. And then I came up with this one story that helped me think about this in a little different ways. So this person, Alan Hamilton, so in this story, I heard about this in the podcast. In this story, she's trying to start a new venture capital firm. Now, if you think the tech community has a diversity problem, the venture capitalist community surely has an even bigger diversity problem, right? So what she was observing, actually, is that if you look at all the founders that's funded by these VC firms, it's disproportionately a young white male. And so what she thought was, well, if she built a new venture capital firm and focus on investing in what she called the minority, like women founder, the Black founders, or the LGBT founders, because she happened to hit all these three boxes. Then these groups of people are currently underrepresented as a startup founder. Right? That's just a fact, a statistical fact. Now, she also makes the observation that whatever makes the startup founders successful, like a grit or persistence or any number of these things, it's reasonable to assume that they come evenly across these gaps. Like just because you're women doesn't mean you lack in these talents. So from those two observations, she comes to a reasonable logical conclusion that, well, if you focus on these underrepresented people, then you have a higher chance of running into high quality candidates, high quality like startup founders, and then therefore her VC firm will be more successful, right? So, and that's a great sort of that made a lot of sense to me as a business, right? And then I thought this structure is applicable for any number of other things. So let's say in the Jenkins project, we have a lot of contributors from America and Europe, but I knew that there's a lot of the software developers in Asia, right? And these people, you don't really see the software developer from Asia in any of the open source community. So they are underrepresented. So if I focus on this audience, then I can turn out higher quality developers more easily because nobody else is competing on these resources, right? So I think the same logic applies not just in her case, but in any number of other situations. And then this story, I'm not really doing a justice to this story itself. It's an amazing story where at one point it involves her sleeping in the San Francisco airport to try to raise a fund and so on. So if you get a chance, I think I highly encourage you to hear all the story. And this is her formulation that I thought is really powerful. It kind of captured the essence of what I'm trying to tell you, which is that it's not like really those are underrepresented people, but it's really just the underestimated people. So if you can sort of correct that bias a little bit inside you, then again you have a higher chance of getting a lot more high quality people into whatever community or the company you're trying to build. Now, there's another story that I've heard around the same time, which is called the curb cutting effect. So this is a kind of story that happened in Berkeley around 1970s. There's a walkway to the road has a gap, right? The curb cutting just generally refers to building a slope. So as you can imagine, for the wheelchair people, the fact that there's a gap is a major problem. It's a major obstacle for their mobility. So in Berkeley, a bunch of the wheelchair people kind of came together and then complained bitterly to the city government to make a slope. Now, what they discovered is that once they cut the slope, it not only benefited the wheelchair people, but a whole bunch of other people, right? Like people who is pushing baby strollers, business people with the carrying the backpack, the suitcases, or the delivery people with the carts. So what this is about is, when the people who complain the most is the people who are most hurt, but when you solve the problem, you're actually solving a little more general problem that benefits the long tail of the other people, right? And as an engineer, I think this is also kind of easily understandable thing, right? When somebody files a bug report, you don't really fix that bug alone. You're kind of fixing a whole bunch of bugs that's represented by that particular incident. So we are used to solving the problem in more general ways. And naturally, when you solve this kind of like the accessibility problem, the same thing happens. In the transcript, the closed captioning, there's a lot of examples where things that are originally done for, let's say, the handicapped people would benefit other people. Like I use the closed captioning all the time in noisy environment because English is not my native language. And then so sometimes it's really hard to hear what's going on. And then in the screen, it helps, right? But I'm not deaf, but that's another example of long tail benefiting from solving the key problems. So when you look at things like that, I sort of started seeing things a little differently, right? So I now think of this as something like this. So building a community or building a company, building any group of people is somewhat like opening a new bar in a new town, right? You have some ideas of like what kind of bar you want to run, and then you create the place, and some people start showing up, and then you observe how they're doing, or these patrons will tell you how they want your place to be improved, and then so you through that interactions, like you keep improving your bar, and then it kind of grows bigger and getting busier and nicer. Now, that's all great, but at some point, if you wanted to unleash the next level of growth, like you have to do something else. And then that something else is basically to kind of walk out and reach out and see who's walking in the street, right? It's not enough to talk to people who are already at your bar. At some point, you need to talk to people who are not coming into your bar because that's the majority of people. And you don't know who they are and where they are and what they need. So what it takes is an active act of reaching out. You might realize that, well, in the street, there's a lot of Hispanic people walking around. And maybe the bar that they open only have like a Japanese menu. So no wonder they can't come in and they can't order because they can't read the menu, right? So sometimes when you just reach out and see those other people up close, that's enough to give you the idea of what needs to be done. And suddenly it stopped being this abstract, fuzzy concept and became far more concrete and solvable problems, tactical problems. And then that's, like when I look at it like that, I could see, oh, like I was actually tackling this kind of problem before. Right? So I mentioned a little bit about the Japanese community. So being from Japan, I know, because I can picture all these faces of people who live over there who are great technologists. That's currently not being a part of this, the network of open source people in the America and in Europe. So, sometimes if you're in the network, you just know that these untapped group of people exist. But if you're outside, you just don't know it, right? So here's an example where I knew this community existed and that can be reached with a little bit of effort, with like things like a language and time zone barrier. These are the obstacles. But the other people doesn't really see that those things exist. And then so when I try to advocate for the fact that, well, we need to bring these Asian developers into the mix, they'd go like, I don't really believe you because I don't really see these Japanese developers walking around here. Right? These people don't exist. It's how other people feel it. So that was a kind of I had this experience before is another thing I thought. And I also realized that I have an experience on the other direction as well, right? I mean, I knew in the head, I suppose in theory, that there's a very active software development community in China, but I've never knew these people, right? And a couple of years ago, I had my first opportunity to visit China, and I was blown away by the scope and size of the software development that's going on. And then I was wondering, well, how come you guys are not joining the project? And then I realized that, all our mailing lists are on the Google. And in China, there's this thing called the Great Firewall. And then guess what? They blocked Google. So they couldn't join our mailing list, right? And then, well, how come you didn't complain? Because we have a social network, and then we have some interaction with individual users on Twitter. And guess what? That's also blocked over there. So sometimes you go there and you talk to people, it immediately becomes obvious, they can't really join this community. Like, no wonder. So that was another example that helped me think about it. And then yet perhaps another example is in the open source project. Right? For the longest time, the Jenkins project only have software developers. And then so we built the governance and like a meritocratic structure that made it difficult for other job functions to join. So at some point when the project got bigger, the first kind of people I needed to bring in the marketing people, so people who run the events and they organize meetups and so on. So they had a mighty difficult time. And I used to think of them as, oh, these marketing people don't know how to engage and work in the open source community. And that's somewhat true, but that's also like only a one-sided way. In some sense, I think they are the first, it's like a guinea pig. They are the wheelchair people that's trying to get into this community. And then so what we had to do, well, we actually did it. We weren't thinking in these terms. We eventually did was we built the governance, we built more structures so that people outside the software development function could feel authenticity and empowered to do some work. And then after this first wave of people came through, we were able to use the same structure for driving more, the documentation people, designers, infrastructure people, and then ops people, and so on and so forth. So again, once we solved this problem for one class of people, we were able to make it a whole lot easier for the rest of the other job functions as well. So these are kind of the sort of like experience and perspective that helped me kind of get to where I am in 2019. I now really think of the diversity isn't just about the gender or the race or some of the well-understood class problems. Not saying that these things do not exist, but I feel like sometimes if you only think about these things, I think it makes it difficult for you to kind of think about what's really important, which in my mind is this never-ending motion of reaching out to a new set of people and then trying to see what's preventing them from being a part of your thing and then solving their challenges. And if you think about it, there's nothing particularly like social, well, there's nothing inherently social about it. It's something that the business do all the time, right? Reaching a new segment of the market and then untapping that to turn that into productive force for the business. So I hope that's kind of how I start to think about it now where I am. And I kind of run out of time, so I wanted to end my talk in here. And so thank you very much.